This week on Jerusalem Dateline, the year in review. In 2013, raging mobs destroy more than 60 churches in Egypt, but the Christians swear they will forgive their attackers. Plus, Israel issues a warning. If the West won't stop Iran's pursuit of nuclear weapons, it will act alone, with force if necessary. And while chemical weapons take center stage in Syria, Al-Qaeda-backed rebels are quietly gaining ground. These stories and more, and our look back at 2013. Hello, and welcome to this special edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell. This week, we'll be looking back at the most important stories from the Middle East in 2013. And joining me to discuss these stories is our panel of experts. Joining me here in the Jerusalem studio is correspondent Julie Stahl, and in our U.S. studios, Chief International Correspondent Gary Lane and CBN Senior Editor John Waggy. We begin with Egypt, where political turmoil turned into religious violence when millions of Egyptians demanded the ouster of Islamic President Mohamed Morsi. The military responded. In the backlash, Islamic radicals sought revenge, and the church suffered its worst attacks in centuries. The city of Minya sits at the epicenter of the persecution against the Christian church. This is the Emir Tadros Church in Minya, just one of the dozens of churches that have been destroyed throughout Egypt. This is a 100-year-old church, and as you can see, it's been completely destroyed on the inside. One Egyptian expert said the violence against the churches in Egypt is the worst in nearly 700 years. This exclusive video, aired for the first time on nationwide TV, shows the inside of the sanctuary is completely gutted and the altar destroyed. Now the church uses this makeshift altar outside, and the pastor explained to us they started holding their services at 6:30 in the morning. Engineers say the church would need to be torn down before it could be rebuilt. The churches weren't the only targets. Schools, cars, and businesses owned by Christians were destroyed. Muslim radicals marked Christian businesses with a black X before torching them. Perhaps most shocking was the destruction of this Christian orphanage. This is a Coptic Christian orphanage called Christ Soldiers. Muslim mobs came in here and they destroyed the building, leaving about 200 children without shelter. But they wanted to leave a message for the attackers, and they wrote it on the wall outside. And it said, "You meant to hurt us, but we forgive you. God is love. Everything works out for good." They also wrote, "Love your enemies." Evangelical ministries bore the brunt of many attacks. This is what remains of the bookstore in Minya of the Bible Society of Egypt. Their store in nearby Eshut was also destroyed.
For the last 130 years, we have been operating. We have bookshops in the streets, in main cities, in Cairo, Alexandria, Tanta, Upper Egypt, and it has never happened in the history of the Bible Society.
According to this Egyptian website, more than 60 churches were attacked from Minya, Alexandria, Giza, Suez, and throughout Egypt. The rampage began after Muslim Brotherhood supporters used the churches as scapegoats for the army's decision to break up 2 Brotherhood protest camps in Cairo. They also blamed the church for participating in the ouster of President Mohamed Morsi. Yet Christians point out many of their Muslim neighbors defended and protected them. They don't see this as a Muslim against Christian issue, but as the Muslim Brotherhood against the Christians. And even though they have been targeted, they are responding with forgiveness and pressing on in the face of persecution.
We respond as every other Christian has responded in Egypt. We are in Egypt to serve. We are in Egypt to demonstrate the Christian love. We do every effort to be self-restrained and to show the Christian love that the Lord has taught us to show.
The churches are asking for prayer and support from the church worldwide.
What happens in Egypt affects the Middle East. So we ask them to pray for the country. We ask them to pray for Christians. We ask them to pray for the Middle East. And we also ask them to pray for the government, for the existing government, that the Lord may give them wisdom, guidance in every decision they make.
While living under threats, they vow to continue their ministries. They say the buildings have been destroyed, but the church goes on. And their faith remains in Jesus Christ, who promised He would build His church. Gary, you've been to Egypt many times. I know you've been there this year as well. How would you describe the events this past year in Egypt? And as they look forward to a new constitution, how significant is that?
I would say, Chris, they're very historic, and there are places of opportunity for Christians and Muslims and secularists in that society, but it's a long road ahead. As far as the Constitution is concerned, the Constitution has minimized the influence of the Islamists. Churches are now going to be guaranteed the right to build and repair their churches. Christians can build new ones. But just because it's guaranteed in the Constitution, if that Constitution is approved, Chris, doesn't mean necessarily that new churches will pop up. They'll have to petition for churches, and you have some of the same leaders in place. Some of the same people who have denied them in the past may very well deny them again. Even if they are approved, Islamists may rise up and attack those churches. But the difference this time, I think, is the courts. They can find relief in the courts and see if the courts will back the right of Christians to worship freely and also to build churches. So a long road ahead, but also opportunities and some reason for optimism.
Yeah, I would say that too, Gary. And John, what do you think about U.S.-Egyptian relations? They've been very changed dramatically this past year.
Well, they have, Chris, and the thing is that at the very time that Egypt may have, with this coup and all the millions of Egyptians turning out in the streets, they may have the most pro-American government in Egypt now that they've had in a long, long time, maybe 35 years, and instead America cut off aid, and the Egyptian street is angrier at the United States of America than at any time in recent history. And Sisi, the man who's likely to be the future leader of Egypt, is almost playing as a descendant of Nasser, who was very anti-American. Mm-hmm. And he's appeared at a Nasser memorial recently, and he's kind of capturing this anti-superpower attitude, and that could be trouble for the United States. The Obama administration is seen as siding with the Muslim Brotherhood, and it isn't a very attractive picture to many Egyptians. And so
yeah, I saw that when I was down in the streets there as well, John. Julie, right. Turning to you, what about, how does this mean for Egyptian-Israeli relations?
I would say that Israel is the one country that actually gets it. Israel is very happy that the Muslim Brotherhood's not in power. They have said, both Egypt and Israel have said that they have the closest relations they've had ever. Al-Sisi is also fighting against the Islamic radicals that are along the border with Israel. So I think Israel's quite happy with this new government.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's ironic that Israel and Egypt are closer now than they had been in decades. Well, also this year, world powers reached an agreement with Iran to curb sanctions in exchange for promises to curb their nuclear program. In the weeks before that agreement, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu pleaded with world leaders not to cave, including a speech to the UN General Assembly, where he pledged Israel would never allow Iran to get a nuclear bomb. Netanyahu's pledge included a veiled threat of an Israeli military strike.
Ladies and gentlemen, Israel will never acquiesce to nuclear arms in the hands of a rogue regime that repeatedly promises to wipe us off the map. Against such a threat, Israel will have no choice but to defend itself. I want there to be no confusion on this point. Israel will not allow Iran to get nuclear weapons. If Israel is forced to stand alone, Israel will stand alone.
Iran called the speech inflammatory, but Netanyahu said if Iran gets a nuclear weapon, it would be like 50 North Koreas. He also warned about Iran's charm offensive and smile campaign, launched by its new president, Hassan Rouhani.
Now I know, Rouhani doesn't sound like Ahmadinejad, but when it comes to Iran's nuclear weapons program, the only difference between them is this. Ahmadinejad was a wolf in wolf's clothing. Rouhani is a wolf in sheep's clothing, a wolf who thinks he can pull the wool over the eyes of the international community.
Netanyahu declared a nuclear Iran represented not only an existential threat to Israel, but also a clear and present danger to the United States and Western powers. He argued sanctions must be kept in place. He also invoked the biblical prophet Amos.
In our time, the biblical prophecies are being realized. As the prophet Amos said, they shall rebuild ruined cities and inhabit them. They shall plant vineyards and drink their wine. They shall till gardens and eat their fruit. And I will plant them upon their soil, never to be uprooted again. Ladies and gentlemen, the people of Israel have come home, never to be uprooted again.
Well, that was a landmark speech, and especially when Netanyahu quoted from the prophet Amos. Gary, just a few weeks ago, though, they had the Geneva Accords where they signed the 6 world powers, the P5+1, signed the accord in Geneva. What do you think that? Is that good or bad?
Well, Chris, I think many critics will say it's bad. They'll say it's shades of Carter and Brzezinski in 1979, 1980, only this time it's Kerry and Obama. Back then, basically the Carter administration said, we can work deals with these guys. We can bring the Ayatollah back, allow him to come into Iran and take power. We'll get rid of the Shah. There's no problem. We can work deals with these guys. And look what happened. They took our people hostage. And we've been at war, a Cold War with them, at least for the last 4 decades. Now, think of how it is today. The Obama administration says 6 months. This will give us 6 months. We can work on a long-term deal at that time. But all it does is kick the can down the road and allow Iran to stall. And we have to remember, Rouhani, even though he has Bibi Netanyahu said he is really a sheep in wolf's clothing, or a wolf in sheep's clothing. Basically, it's the Ayatollah who really controls things in Iran. And he is anti-American. He's going full steam ahead on developing nuclear weapons. So at this point, I think many people feel it's not a good deal at all.
Yeah, I agree. John, you know, Gary referenced Carter and Brzezinski. What are people saying about Netanyahu? I know there's a historical analogy that many people are comparing him to.
Yes, well, you know, for a lot of people, this 2013 feels a bit like 1938. And Winston Churchill was pretty much all alone on the world stage, warning about Hitler, warning about what is going to happen to the Western powers. And what we've had is for 10 years or more, Netanyahu has done the same thing and warned about Iran. And meanwhile, the Western powers, just like Neville Chamberlain did in 1938, making a deal with Hitler, they've made a deal with the devil here in Geneva. And I think we're going to see 2013 as a chapter-turning kind of year in world history because of the deal made in Geneva. And what it has done, you know, back in World War II, right up until 1941, the American people were very isolationist and opposed to getting any involvement in a European war. But the President, Roosevelt, was preparing the country for war. What we have now is the United States taking part in appeasement and basically leaving Israel to fend for itself. And I don't think that people are going to like the results down the road.
I would agree. And Julie, briefly, what are Israelis saying? I mean, you've been on the streets talking to some Israelis about this.
Yeah, you know, I think from top to bottom, Israelis have said it's a mistake. They believe that it's really a mistake that this agreement. A lot of people were mad at the U.S. There was a poll that said half of Israelis wanted to look for a new best friend. But I think, you know, for the most part, what we heard, everything that we heard was people said, America's wrong, but they're still our best friend. We disagree, but they're our best friend. Right. And I think one thing that's really underplayed is that actually Israel is America's best friend, not only in the Middle East, but probably around the world.
Yeah, I would say definitely in the Middle East. Well, up next, from chemical weapons to al-Qaeda-backed rebels, the growing dangers of Syria's civil war, and the millions of refugees in desperate need of help.
Hi, my name is Breda. I'm just your typical 9-year-old. I love singing, dancing, reading, discovering the simple truth. My grandpa says you're never too young or old to learn the value of a dollar. He taught me the true value of this paper dollar. You see this little gold coin? It says $1 on it. But guess what? That was a long time ago. Today, this gold dollar is worth over 100 paper dollars. This paper dollar is now only worth 1 penny compared to America's former money, the gold dollar. My grandpa says the only money worth saving today is real money, gold or silver coins. He's pretty smart. How our paper dollars lost their value, he says. It's all explained in a new book, The Great Debasement. It's easy and fun to read. If you call the number on the screen, I will send you a copy totally free. Next time, I'll explain the simple truth about money.
Millions of Americans with an ostomy live their lives to the fullest every day. And over the last 10 years, thousands have chosen Liberator Medical as their caring and reliable resource for ostomy supplies. Liberator Medical is a nationally accredited Medicare, Medicaid, and insurance provider, so we can handle all your Medicare, Medicaid, and insurance paperwork and billing. And Liberator Medical has been chosen as a preferred supplier by all the leading ostomy manufacturers, including Coloplast, Hollister, Convatec, and Generics. We supply all these leading ostomy brands so you can always get the ostomy supplies and accessories you want and trust. And all of our ostomy care specialists are product certified by the manufacturers. Shipping is free and discreetly delivered right to your door. Unhappy with your present ostomy supplier? Call Liberator Medical and ask about our free ostomy sampling program. We also offer catheters and urological supplies.
Call 1-800-513-3076. That's 1-800-513-3076.
This year, the civil war in Syria took some ominous turns, including a chemical weapons attack by the Assad regime that killed hundreds of civilians. That prompted world intervention and the possibility of a U.S. military strike. After days of deliberation, President Obama backed off and accepted a Russian proposal to oversee the destruction of Syria's chemical weapons stockpile. Now there's growing evidence that an al-Qaeda-linked rebels are gaining power and seeking to establish an Islamic State. Meanwhile, there's a full-scale humanitarian crisis as millions of refugees are taking shelter in neighboring countries. I know you've just been in the Baca Valley not too long ago, Gary. What's happening to the Christians, especially right there?
Well, Chris, the Christians are under intense pressure right now, as they have been. I met with one family. They had just come out. They'd only been in Lebanon for about 2 weeks. And I said, tell me, what's going on there? They said there's no electric, there's no water, there's no heat. The Islamists are surrounding our village. People are not allowed in and out. We were barely able to get out alive. And he told me one story about a man, a friend of his, a Christian man, who had a nice car. And the Islamist rebels came up, shot him in the head 7 times, and stole his car. Another neighbor was robbed as he was taking money from his gold shop to the bank, and then they went and killed him and then stole everything out of his store. But churches are being destroyed. Christians are going hungry, as many other people are throughout the country. But Chris, I've got to say this about the chemical weapons, because you'd mentioned that. How do we know how many Assad had? How does the U.S. know that? Did we keep track and know every single stockpile that he had of chemical weapons? And you remember Ronald Reagan. He had a saying back when he was negotiating nuclear arms reductions with the Russians. He used to always say, trust but verify. How can we verify that all these chemical weapons were actually removed? How can you do that when you don't know how many are there to begin with? So it's very strange how this is playing out, and we'll have to see. But for the Christians, things do not look good.
Yeah, that's very unfortunate, tragic over here. John, what does this say about the Obama administration and their foreign policy in the Middle East?
Well, what it seems like, Chris, is especially to U.S. former allies in the Middle East, it seems as if the U.S. is giving comfort to America's enemies and giving nothing but trouble to America's best allies. And I include the Saudis in that. They're furious with the way the U.S. has handled the Iran deal and Syria and a number of other things. And we're talking about big picture alterations in American alliances in the Middle East. And this is going to cause trouble down the road, because if the Saudis start their own nuclear arms race and the Egyptians decide they need nuclear weapons to protect themselves against Iran and Syria under Assad, then the whole region, there's a threat of a conflagration, and that's not good.
No, not good at all. Julie here. Now Syria's got a civil war. I mean, Israel has a civil war on its border with Syria. What does this mean for Israel?
Well, you know, Chris, there have been some cross-border fire a few times. No casualties on the Israeli side yet. Israel has presumably it was Israel that actually carried out airstrikes on weapons that were being transferred to Hezbollah. One of the things it's meant humanitarian-wise, Israel has actually been taking hundreds of Syrians into its hospitals, treating them, people wounded, people sick, given birth to a few babies. Also, that Israel's defense minister, Moshe Ya'alon, he admitted recently that Israel is actually sending humanitarian aid into Syria right now.
Yeah, that's much an untold story in many ways. A lot of people don't understand that. When we come back, some final thoughts from our panel of experts about the year in review.
Attention sleep apnea patients. Are you tired of the expense and hassle of getting your CPAP and BiPAP supplies? Are you fed up with dealing with ill-fitting, leaking, or worn-out masks and straps? Are you worried about the effects that unsanitary tubes, cushions, and filters have on your health? If you said yes to any of these questions, Allied Medical Supply Network has the solution to your problems. You could qualify to have your supplies regularly delivered right to your door at little or no cost to you. That's right, no more inconvenience, no worn-out masks and straps, no more unsanitary equipment, just restful sleep. Call Allied Medical Supply Network today to determine if you may qualify to receive your fresh, brand-name supplies at little or no cost. Don't delay. Call us now to see if you are eligible to save money on regular delivery of your CPAP and BiPAP supplies. Call 1-800-815-9947. That's 1-800-815-9947. Or go to cpapsupplyhelpline.com.
Announcing an important breakthrough in healthcare that can benefit everyone. If you or anyone you love needs affordable health insurance, regardless of a pre-existing medical condition, call Quick Insurance 123 today and get the immediate relief you deserve. Quick Insurance 123 was created to provide affordable health insurance to all uninsured Americans, with or without pre-existing conditions. This is not a discount card. This is a real insurance program that lets you choose from many affordable health plans, with access to doctors, hospitals, emergency services, and more. So call the number on your screen now and get the health coverage you need, just for calling. As a special bonus, we'll send you a free prescription savings card that could save you up to 85% on your prescriptions. That's right, you could save up to 85% on your prescriptions just for calling. Call Quick Insurance 123 to find out how you can get affordable health insurance and receive your free prescription savings card just for calling. Don't wait. Getting a free quote is as easy as 1, 2, 3. Call today.
Welcome back to Jerusalem Dateline. Well, for some final thoughts on the year, we'll turn to our expert panels, Gary, John, and Julie. Gary, when you look back at 2013, what strikes you as the most significant development?
Well, I'd say two things, Chris. Number one would have to be Egypt. In August, Christians saw some of the worst attacks on their churches, their homes, their businesses, any Christian institution in Egypt in many, many years. And people have been killed. Islamists have taken over in some villages. Christians were killed in those villages, also forced to pay a jizya tax. And if they didn't pay, they were killed. Also assassination attempts against a bishop in Elmina. So it was a very difficult time for Christians in Egypt, but also in Syria. The church is under intense pressure there. Their churches have been destroyed. Christians have been killed, kidnapped, and many have been forced to flee. And at the end of this year, I was in Lebanon and also before that, northern Iraq. Iraq is another place where we've seen Christians go from about 1.2 million down to about 350, 400,000. There's been this pressure on the church and Christians throughout the Middle East, a mass exodus. I think it's been a very historic year, a very difficult one. If the trend continues in 2014, are we going to see any Christians left in the Middle East?
Yeah, that's a huge story, and I'm glad that CBN News just keeps on that, as well as you, Gary, going to many of these places to report on that. John, how about your thoughts as we look back on 2013?
Well, I think that 2013 will be remembered as a year that American foreign policy deviated from decades of previous policy on a number of fronts in the Middle East, including our relations with Egypt, our relations with the Saudis, our relations with Israel. And I don't think we should minimize the number of visits that John Kerry, as Secretary of State, made to the Middle East. 11 visits. And what that says to me is that they have created a linkage in the Obama administration between the stopping Iran's nuclear development and establishing a Palestinian state in the Middle East. And it doesn't get many headlines, but I think that is the way that American foreign policy is drifting right now. I think that they're very committed to this, and I think that that is something that needs to be watched closely in the months ahead.
I would agree. I mean, we did a story on that just about a week or so ago, and we talked to the former Israeli ambassador to Egypt who said this shift is just such a significant change in the Middle East. Julie, how about you? We're here in Israel and Jerusalem. What's your thoughts about looking back?
Well, we've spoken about it before, the Geneva Accord and Bibi's speech at the UN, and I think that was really a turning point for Israel, where, for years Netanyahu has really worked to get the international community behind this whole sanctions regime, and it was like in a minute, the international community shifted and turned kind of against Israel, or maybe not quite against Israel, but in favor of their enemies, those who want to destroy them. But we just passed Hanukkah recently, and one woman said to me, the message of Hanukkah is that civilizations have come and gone, but the Jewish people are still burning bright. And we know that that's because that's God's design. That's not because they're great and mighty, but because it's God's plan. And I think we can trust also that He's going to intervene in this year. We hope so. We pray so for the Christians and also for Israel, for the Jewish people.
Right. Right.
Also we've also seen that that there's been a great increase in Jewish-Christian relations. We had Ron Lauder on our show talking about how they want to stand up for persecuted Christians, the Jewish people. So we're seeing kind of a uniting of Jews and Christians also in the face of persecution.
Right. Been a significant year in so many ways. Julie Stahl, thank you for joining us. For John Waggy and for Gary Lane there in our Virginia Beach studios, and we'll be right back.
Do you have an idea for an invention or a new product? Brian and Alice Jagosh, the inventors of the halftime drill driver, did. They invented a power drill attachment that lets you drill, flip, and drive in seconds. Brian and Alice licensed their invention to the company that brought you the Snuggie, and it's now selling in major retailers nationwide. Look for the Invent Help Caveman on the package. If you have an invention that you would like to try to patent and submit to companies for possible review and want free information on how InventHelp may be able to assist you, call now. InventHelp is America's largest inventor service company with sales offices in more than 60 cities nationwide. Call InventHelp today for free information. Our clients made a financial gain with their invention, but this is just their individual result. Brian and Alice's experience is not typical, as only a very small number of inventions are licensed or sold in stores.
For your free inventors information, call 1-800-559-8567. That's 1-800-559-8567.
If you had a choice between going bald and a full head of hair, which would you choose? Advances in medical science have resulted in the world's first and only permanent solution to hair loss.
Yes!
You wash it, you cut it. It's your own real, naturally growing hair. When it comes to hair restoration, no one in the world has more experience than Bosley. The results look completely natural and are affordable on nearly any budget. But the entire process can't be explained in 60 brief seconds. So to find out more about this clinically proven and permanent solution to hair loss, call now to receive your free no-obligation information kit. It'll answer all of your questions about hair loss and hair restoration. Plus, we'll also send you this $250 gift certificate just for calling. Every day you wait, you're losing more hair. So don't put it off any longer. You owe it to yourself to find out the facts. Choose hair. Choose Bosley.
Call 800-868-9957. That's 800-868-9957.
Well, 2013 was a significant year, and we expect 2014 to be a profound year as well here in the Middle East. Well, that's it for our special year in review edition. Join us next time for a new year of new stories on Jerusalem Dateline.